We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
President Kennedy's goal was ambitious, sending a man to the moon by the end of the decade. He explained this goal at this 1962 speech at Rice University in Texas. America was in the midst of the Cold War, a political, militaristic, and economic battle with the Soviet Union and other communist countries worldwide. At the time, the Soviets were winning the space race, having beaten the U.S. by putting the first satellite in orbit, the first human in space, and the first person in orbit. The U.S. desperately needed a win, a turning point. America also needed something positive, due to low morale from the horrors of the Vietnam War, rampant inflation, and violent university protests. During the next 7 years, the U.S. built on its Mercury and Gemini programs to achieve goals no other country had accomplished. It did this for several reasons. One was a sense of exploration, a desire to study. But this also allowed the U.S. to push ahead in the space race. This was significant because it was a win, in an unofficial battle of the Cold War.
So when we got onto the moon, in Apollo 11, we finally, Neil put his first footprint there. It was a huge morale boost for America. And it's one we still ride.
By going to the moon, America was the first to leave Earth's orbit and venture further into the final frontier. This was crucial because it showed that American scientists and engineers were the best in the world and could do what no other country could. The United States decided to take on the challenge given by President Kennedy, so the U.S. stepped up production. It also added higher math and science curricula for students to the National Defense Education Act that had been passed in 1958. As a result, many students went into science and engineering fields. NASA gathered a group of scientists together to see how truly possible the challenge was. However, many highly regarded scientists and engineers believed it was not possible. Over the next few years, the United States put $25 billion, $100 billion today, into the Apollo program. Most of this money went to the breakthrough rocket Saturn V. This technology was significant because it was able to leave Earth's gravitational pull. This breakthrough was also a turning point in NASA because it allowed it to shift its goals farther into space. On July 16, 1969, Michael Collins, Neil Armstrong, and Buzz Aldrin all climbed aboard the Saturn V rocket, and at 9:32 a.m., the Apollo 11 spaceship began its journey to the moon.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
Over the next 4 days, it continued on course. Finally, on July 20th, at around 4 o'clock p.m., the lunar lander began its descent to the surface of the moon.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro, go. Rhino, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for landing.
Pitch forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward, just contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
You're looking good here.
As he said, the Eagle has landed. Words that are due to live in the history books forevermore.
At 4:18 Eastern Time, under the eyes of the entire world, the lunar lander, the Eagle, touched down on the Sea of Tranquility, now codenamed Tranquility Base. Neil Armstrong then prepared to make his first steps on the moon.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
His step was truly a leap for all mankind, as it was the first time in history that a human walked on a surface outside the Earth. As the entire world celebrated, there were still 2 men left on the moon, and they would remain there for most of the day. On July 21st, at approximately 2 p.m., Armstrong and Aldrin left the lunar surface. They then rejoined Collins in the command module and began their journey home. After their 3-day journey, they splashed down on July 24th at 12:51 in the Pacific Ocean, southwest of Honolulu. Landing 2 astronauts on the moon was one of the greatest moments in world history, and in the entire field of space and aeronautics. The fact that the United States had put a man on the lunar surface changed people's views of what was possible.
Nobody had ever the sphere of influence of the Earth, no human. And as you go to the moon, there's a point, and it's very precise, where you leave the gravitational pull of the Earth and you become captive to the moon. So for humans just to leave the Earth and the sphere of influence that humans had lived in since the beginning was a very significant historical event. And even at that, until Neil actually stepped on the surface, it hadn't been completed.
This astounding event caused a domestic morale boost that was desperately needed. With the endless war in Vietnam, the constant fear of nuclear war with the Soviet Union, and the assassinations of President Kennedy, his brother Robert, and Martin Luther King Jr. The sight of Neil Armstrong taking that giant leap instantly united all Americans. Until this moment, the United States had been losing the space race. However, when the U.S. landed a man on the moon, that all changed. Victory in space was one of the biggest factors needed to defeat the Soviet Union in the Cold War. For a brief period after the Apollo missions, the Soviets tried to catch up with the U.S. in the space race, but they quickly fell further into debt and had to curtail space exploration. In the years that followed, the space race in combination with other conflicts helped lead to the downfall of the Soviet Union. Before the Apollo program, Americans had little confidence in NASA. Apollo 11 and previous Apollo missions were a turning point in people's views toward the American space program. The moon landing also changed the way first, second, and third world countries viewed the United States during the Cold War. The Apollo 11 mission was also a turning point in media. Those first steps were beamed to nearly every country around the world. It was truly the first mass media event. An estimated 600 million people watched. That's 1 out of every 5 on the planet.
Everybody could share in real time the excitement of the exploration. You know, we're used to global media and instant coverage of things happening on the other side of the world, but this was the first time that happened.
The lunar landing opened a whole new frontier to discover. Having mapped all of our world, the sense of discovery was beginning to fade. Space soon became a whole new place to discover and explore. This relates to Apollo 11 because history changed when man migrated outside the borders of the Earth. The mission was a turning point for space exploration itself. Even though the United States landed on the moon 5 more times, interest grew for other types of missions and new forms of research. It led to Skylab, the shuttle program, the International Space Station, and eventually the Mars rovers. It also brought about countless scientific advancements, and led to some things we now take for granted. For example, today's athletic shoes use technology first developed for Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's boots, and many of today's cordless power tools are based on tools designed to use on the moon. Apollo 11 also improved the American education system. The preparation for Apollo brought a more advanced education system that we arguably would not have today. The interest in Apollo made science and mathematics fields boom as well.
The need for high speed for the time, computing, low weight miniaturization of the electronics, high reliability systems, all of those, I think, are technologies that were developed during Apollo.
The mission was also a monumental turning point for the United States, as it cemented the U.S.'s position as the world's leader in technology.
There are some people that say they think the 20th century will be 100 years from now or 500 years from now, that the most significant event will be Apollo, sending people to the moon for the first time.
However, even though many supported the Apollo missions, others strongly opposed them. Thousands of citizens, as well as many politicians, thought that the money used to fund NASA at the time could have gone to better causes such as infrastructure. People were taxed heavily due to the tremendous amount of money NASA needed for the Apollo missions. This angered many Americans. The 1960s were a harsh and unnerving time for America. With the Vietnam War waging and the Cold War haunting over the U.S., the Apollo 11 mission gave big media a chance to test itself, won the space race for the United States, changed people's perspective of man, was arguably the greatest scientific achievement in all of history, and set the stage for what is possibly to come. Today, Americans use the Apollo 11 mission as a symbol of the U.S.'s perseverance and determination. The Apollo 11 mission changed history forever.
The date's now indelible. It's going to be remembered as long as man survives. July 20th, 1969, the day man reached and walked on the moon.